Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with RotoCurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings NBA video for Friday, April 1st. It's actually going to be our last NBA video that we're going to be putting up. We're going to be switching over to our MLB content, so I'll have the Benny's Bats section from last season. We'll be making a return. I'll probably have the first one up on Monday for the games on Monday, so make sure you check back here for your MLB DFS needs, and we will still have all the tools up for NBA. There'll be some NBA discussions going on, and Josh, Ricky, or myself will probably be around in chat to answer some questions for you on the NBA front as well. But at least until the playoffs start, we're going to be focusing mostly on MLB after today. So let's try to get one more profitable day of NBA out of us before we move on and start talking about MLB. So I'm going to call up the slideshow. We're going to talk about three guys today who we like and have found their way onto a lot of our early rosters. The three guys we're going to talk about here today: Victor Oladipo at 7,300, Draymond Green at 8,100, and Kosta Koufos at 4,100. Now, the first guy up is Oladipo. He's got a matchup with Milwaukee, which isn't really the greatest matchup overall on paper, but this is a guy who was priced up about $400 or $500 more before sitting out with an injury a few games back. He had been averaging over 40 fantasy points a game for 10 straight games before going down with an injury, sitting out for 2 games, coming back and only playing like 25 minutes for like 30 fantasy points or so, seeing his price drop again. Now, he got back to his full minutes last night, and he put up 44 fantasy points with them. I think right now he's just a little bit too cheap for a guy that has basically been averaging 40 fantasy points 15, and over that time, that return would be 6x at his price of 7,300 today. So you got a guy who can give you a 6x return as basically his average, which means that if he has a big game and gets up into the 50s, you're probably looking at a 7, maybe even 7.5 to 8x kind of return. Against Milwaukee, with Oladipo being a big part of this Magic offense right now, I definitely think there's a chance that he can get you that solid 6x upside and even give you more on top of it. Next guy I want to talk about, another somewhat expensive option at 8,100, is Draymond Green. His Warriors team is favored by 12 in a game with a huge 223-point total against the Boston Celtics. Now, the Celtics are bad against big men. They have been all season long. Forwards tend to do more against them because their defense is so solid at the guard spot. So you tend up seeing guys that play the small forward and power forward role have some of their better games when they go up against the Celtics. Now, Draymond is already a guy who's a triple-double threat every time he steps on the floor. And he's actually had 50-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games, which would be a return of 6x or better if he's able to do that again here at 8,100. Now, the Celtics are a good team, which is actually a good thing in this situation because that could mean that this game stays close. When games stay close, we get extra minutes out of guys like Draymond, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and that's usually when we see these guys hit their upside. So at 8,100 on DraftKings today, I think Draymond Green's a good chance for a triple-double, and I think he's a good chance to get us around 50 fantasy points, which would be 6x with some upside. Now, the last guy I want to talk about is Kosta Koufos at 4,100. 212 total for him in this game against Miami, and Boogie Cousins is suspended, so Koufos is likely to be the guy that's starting. Koufos versus Cauley-Stein is going to be a legitimate question today. It's something that basically everybody's going to be asking themselves because they're 2 of the cheap options that you could roll out there at center who are going to be seeing an uptick in minutes with Boogie Cousins out. Now, the reason why I like Koufos a little more, think about how Miami plays. If Koufos starts, he's going to get a matchup with Amari Stoudemire for the first, 7 minutes of that game or so until they bring in Hassan Whiteside. So that means that if Koufos is the one who's starting and Willie Cauley-Stein's the one who's coming off the bench and coming in for Koufos, Cauley-Stein's matchup is going to be with Hassan Whiteside, whereas Kosta Koufos' matchup is going to be with Amari Stoudemire. I would much rather take the guy who has the matchup with Amari Stoudemire than the guy who has the matchup with Hassan Whiteside, who I think everybody would agree is probably the better of the 2 centers. Now, Koufos has been getting about 25 fantasy points a game when he does see 25 minutes. He had 26 fantasy points and 38 fantasy points the last 2 games that Boogie was out and he wound up starting. So I definitely think that he can give us upside here. Even at the 26, which was what he had the last game, that's still a 6x upside that he's giving you. So he's still a guy that's going to help you win a tournament at that level. And remember, that game turned into a little bit of a blowout, and Cauley-Stein actually outscored him in that game, but Cauley-Stein outscored him because he got a whole bunch of garbage time points that wound up pushing him ahead. It probably should have been about 30 points for Koufos and probably a little bit less than that than Cauley-Stein. I think the 2 of them are very even. The things that push me ahead here are like I said, Cauley Stein coming in with the second unit will probably have to deal a little bit more with Hassan Whiteside if that's the way they break it down. And also, Koufos is $500 cheaper than Cauley Stein is. So I'll take the guy who's $500 cheaper because that means it's going to be easier for him to not only hit his upside, but also give me value added. And I'll definitely take the guy who's getting the matchup with Amari versus the guy who gets the matchup with Whiteside. So if you're wondering how I see the Kosta Koufos versus Cauley Stein argument, that's the way that it breaks out for me. It's not that I don't like Cauley Stein. It's just that I think Koufos is probably in a little bit of a better spot. Now, remember, last week, the correct answer to Koufos versus Cauley Stein was actually both. So if you had both of those guys in your lineup, I think it cost you, I don't know, like 6,700 or 6,800 or something like that. And each one of them got you over 30, got you about 30 fantasy points. I think you wound up with 60 fantasy points from the two of them for about, like I said, a little less than $7,000. So it was like an 8.5 times return. That's when their prices were down at like 32, 3,500. Their prices now are at 41 and 4,600. So now you're paying 87 for them. If they get you that same 60, it's still a pretty solid return. You're still probably talking about 7x, which isn't bad, but it's not the same kind of upside as when they were $3,000 guys. So I don't know if I'm going to roll both of them out together today. If I really needed to in order to fit guys in on the rest of my roster, it's obviously something that's in consideration. But remember, they are playing Miami. It's not really the greatest matchup. It's not really the spot that I would be looking for these guys to put up their, top 35 to 40 point game of the season like they have both done before. I think they're both in line for somewhere between 25 and 35 fantasy points, which, again, for the price that you're being asked to pay for them is not too unreasonable. So that's some of the guys who have made it their way onto a lot of my early rosters today. That's the way I see it as of now. Remember, with all the craziness that's going on this time of year in NBA DFS, there's a good likelihood we're going to get a couple guys sitting, a couple guys that are, injured. The stomach bug that's been going around has been affecting a lot of teams. So we'll probably have some more value that opens up between now and lineup lock time. So just make sure that you keep on top of all the news flow because, think about it. Last night, you put up 300 points. You probably were below the GPP cash line, as I know I was last night. You really needed like 310, 320 to feel comfortable. And I think 370 or 380 is what it took to take down some of these big tournaments. So remember, 6X is not not an upside anymore. That's basically a floor. If you don't think the guy that you're starting can get you around that 6X value or 5X value, 5.5X, if he's somebody who's priced up around like $9,000 or $10,000, don't be putting them in your roster because at this time of year, if you're not going big, you're going home with no money. So just keep that in mind. Again, like I said, make sure you guys check back next week. We're going to be starting our MLB content. I'll be coming at you first thing in the morning with the Benny's Bats section, breaking down all the pitching and hitting matchups for you, kind of giving you guys a first look and an idea of some of the guys who should be making your short list. And then we'll have a lot more stuff coming throughout the day. We got a really good team. We beefed up our team from last year for MLB for this season. Josh is still back. We brought on guys like Steve, who works over at the Playbook with me as well. Just a lot of guys who are going to be here, a lot of good content coming out for the MLB season. So hopefully we can keep it going and help you guys make some money. Thank you for joining us here at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.